Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for another draft educational video. My name is Bahamut, joined by Justing, and today we're going to be talking about everyone's least favorite support, or maybe some of your favorite support. We're going to talk about Medivh. Justing, are you ready to break down how to draft Medivh for everyone at home?
I sure am, and Medivh is Springy's favorite hero for sure because of the bird form. A fan favorite, to say the least. Medivh is very unfun to play against and very fun to play with, and we're going to break down sort of how to draft Medivh and maybe why it's failed for some teams in the past.
Well, let's immediately jump into the first portion of this, which is the maps. What maps are Medivh's best maps here, Justing?
So the maps that are good for Medivh are really teamfight heavy maps that have a lot of small rotations where you can not really get taken advantage of the lack of wave clear that Medivh has, and where you can portal between the lanes. So Infernal Shrines, Volskaya, Tomb, and Towers are all really good maps for Medivh. Maps where you don't need to be split up too much. You can really just be together with your portals and get an advantage that way. And the bad maps would be things like Sky Temple, Dragonshire, because you need to be split up all the time, Cursed Hollow, Altric, and BOE. Maps where you don't really get a lot of value out of that portal, and you need to be split up quite a bit doing macro on the map. That's really one of the bigger weaknesses to Medivh.
And he kind of seems like he works on every map, but I definitely agree. Sometimes the maps where, you're just infighting a lot, like Battlefield of Eternity, don't really work out for him. You can definitely get a lot of your stacks done very quickly, and there is some protective value, but he is a little lackluster on that Battlefield map. As we get into what would be a draft, what do you want to ban if you were the drafting team for Medivh?
So you're going to want to look to ban away some of the Medivh counters if you know that you're going for him in mind. Junkrat is a big one. He's probably the biggest meta pick that counters Medivh right now. Balstad's another big one that would be worth banning. The Gust and the sort of just all the displacement from Junkrat is a big problem for Medivh. Being able to portal in without getting Junkrat trapped or having your whole team knocked away by the displacement from the Junkrat bomb is really huge. So you'd be looking to ban away things like the Junkrat or the Falstad. Things that have displacement really mess with Medivh.
And is there anything about maybe Malfurion? Does he start to see priority as a potential ban? Because you can have that root sitting underneath a portal, and with Emerald Dreams at level 1, it's so much CC potential.
Yeah, there's Malfurion with Medivh. If Medivh is meta for both teams, is kind of a high priority pick because he's also really good with Medivh. The thing that Malf lacks is that that burst saving. If someone gets if someone's getting bursted, Malf doesn't really stop that, but the Medivh Protect does, and that combos really well, and also having that CC is nice. And if they're against a Medivh, putting the root down under the portal really makes people second guess whether or not their whole team can take a portal. And Medivh is all about playing together with your team, and anything that kind of stops you from doing that is really strong against it.
Well, we actually kind of transitioned right into some of our better picks for Medivh, so Malfurion could be one of them. Is there anything else that you want to early pick with the Medivh, or how early do you even want to pick Medivh in your draft?
So it depends on teams' priorities in general. I don't think you can really get punished too much by picking Medivh early, as long as you have a good, solid plan. And I think the main way that teams have kind of failed to make Medivh look OP in the past is not drafting him with the proper Formuoli. And that's really the special sauce that you need. You need to have a very specific type of draft built around the Medivh in order to enable him and to make up for his weaknesses, which is mostly his lack of wave clear, his lack of damage. You need to find a way to kind of create a whole comp around that. So that's what we should look to get into, so that everyone kind of have an understanding of what an optimal Medivh draft would really look like.
Well, let's dive right in and start breaking this down. How would you start drafting this Medivh?
So the most important part that can't really be substituted for is the support role. You really want a support that has good sustain and has CC. That is one of the things that Medivh lacks, is he has the burst prevention, but you need a support that pairs with that. You don't really want to pick something like a Lucio or an Uther with Medivh, because they're really good at saving targets from getting one shot, but that's kind of already Medivh's job, so you don't really need that. You really want some kind of CC, some crowd control from your support. Something like a Malfurion or a Stukov or a Deckard is the best, because they have good sustain, but they're not good at preventing one-shots on their own. So supplementing that with the Medivh, really nice, and being able to have that CC from your support when you're roaming around as 4 people taking the portal, looking for picks, is really huge. So prioritizing the Stukov, the Malf, the Deckard. Okay options would be things like the Oriole, the Ana, and the Brightwing, but the support is definitely the most important part of what you need to pair with your Medivh in a Medivh comp.
And here's the big thing that I need to ask, Justin. Do you grab Medivh right when the draft starts, right at the top of the draft? Or are you waiting later in the draft? Are you kind of building out your roster and then kind of like the Cho'Gall, you're leaving it for later in the draft?
So it kind of depends on the team's style. And if you're a confident Medivh, you can totally pick it early, and it's absolutely not a problem. Medivh is so flexible and so strong. There's different ways you can draft with him. Well, some parts like the support are pretty predictable. The other parts, things can get a little bit different. Once we get into the tank priorities with Medivh, things can change quite a bit, and it can be very unpredictable. So, if I think that Medivh is so OP that he should be getting picked first or banned every game. I don't think that's the case right now, and I think a lot of the reason for that is because people don't understand how to draft with him. And you ban out the easy counters like the Junkrat, and I think there's no problem with picking it early.
All right, so let's just say for our video here, you're drafting Medivh very early, and we're getting into the mid-phase bans. You've already gotten rid of Junkrat, which is really, really strong. Is there any sort of other counters that we should be considering in the mid-phase ban, or even in general for this Medivh draft?
So something that comes up a lot in these videos is things like the Diablo on the second ban. And with Medivh, it's even more important to either pick or ban that Diablo. The main reason being is when you have a Medivh that's taking up one of your damage slots, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to deal with tanks that have a lot of HP. Having that lack of damage really makes it a lot harder to kill something like a Diablo. So you'd be looking at just the tanky tanks, or even banning out some more displacement, like the Muradins with the Haymakers, and anything else that really messes with your portals.
All right, so we're building out this draft. So let's say you're getting this Malfurion, Medivh, Diablo, and we're through the mid-phase ban. What else do you need to build out with this Medivh draft? Because obviously we've got a tank, we've got a support, and we've got a healer, but we don't really have a lot of damage here.
Yeah, so the way that the ranged role works with the Medivh comp is you need to have sort of a hyper carry that can kind of do everything, because the Medivh can't always be with the 4-man. Sometimes it needs to go help out the offlaner. Sometimes it needs to be just scouting the enemy team in bird form. You need to have a really self-reliant 3-man that becomes a extremely powerful 4-man when the Medivh is there. So something like a Tychus that would help you to deal with the tanks if you didn't get the Diablo. Something like a Sylvanas, a Vala, a Zul'jin, and a Nazebo. Those are all heroes that are good hyper carries that you can use to kind of make up for the weaknesses that Medivh has. You need to have good sustain damage. You need to be able to kill tanks to some extent with your ranged. And you also need a little bit of wave clear on your ranged. So there's a very small pool of heroes that really fits that Medivh ranged hyper carry slot. And yeah, if you don't pick one, you'll have a lot worse of a time.
And so we've talked about these range assassins that go well with the composition, typically a hyper carry in that sense. Do you need to go for what sort of offlane do you look for here? Is it something that's wave clear dependent like a Zul, Dahaka? Can you really go into anything for the offlane?
So with a traditional Medivh comp, you do want to pick something that does a little bit more damage depending on what ranged you have. Things like Malthael can be strong. Medivh is the one hero that sort of breaks the offlane meta a bit. Typically, you only see things like the Blaze, the Dahaka, Leoric, Johanna, those types of picks. And those are good if you pick something a little bit weird for your tank, like a Zul. But in a traditional Medivh comp, you'll typically lack damage if you don't have something like a Malthael in the offlane. So Medivh does kind of change the game. He really breaks it. And for offlane, you'd be looking at either picking a really standard one, like a Blaze, Dahaka, Leoric, Johanna, just the really standard meta picks, or you can go into something like a Malthael or a Sonya, something that does a lot of damage and isn't typically seen in the offlane, and can almost fill the main tank slot as well, like the Sonya, the Ragnaros. Those types of heroes, the Zul, just really kind of are only pickable with a Medivh if you want to be playing optimally.
All right. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. You have a draft. You have a way to draft Medivh. And of course, Justin, we have to answer one more question for everyone at home. Specifically, you have to answer one more question for everyone at home. How do you play this Medivh? Is it all gas, portal in, get ganks, or much like Cho'Gall, is it a kind of a slow burn? You want to build up, you want to get those stacks and kind of methodically play against your enemy?
Yeah, you really need to be playing cohesively with your team with Medivh. His main drawback is that macro, because he doesn't have any wave clear on his own. He doesn't have a ton of damage to kill tanks. So you're really looking to enable your teammates to get things done together as a 4-man. And that's really where he thrives, is playing in that team fight environment. disrupting rotations, just being annoying with your Qs in the early mid game, and then saving anyone who gets caught out with the protects, portaling to save people, and also using portals proactively to kind of get an advantage in the rotations. While he does lack wave clear in the traditional sense, if you have wave clear, you can get your team to rotate faster with the portals. So it kind of makes up for that weakness if everyone's playing together. So he's really just the most team-dependent hero in the entire game. So you want to make sure that you think of it in that sense as a team player, Medivh.
Macro is the key with Medivh, I feel, and this is what I see in a lot of the games that I cast and even play, is just the big rotational factors you're mentioning. Things like Tomb of the Spider Queen, jumping from top to mid a lot faster, or even rotating to bottom lane to gank that solo laner that's maybe a little too far forward, or maybe they're trying to grab that lobster camp or the siege giant camp in the bottom lane. Justing, thank you as always for joining us for this Medivh breakdown, and for anyone who's wondering about that Cho'Gall video, you can check it out right here.